Welcome back to another episode of the Phoenix Founders Podcast. I'm very excited today to have Cindy Jordan with me, the founder of Pyx Health and serial entrepreneur. Cindy, great to have you today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for making it work.
We got a slightly different setup. You're in Tucson this morning, right?
I am, unfortunately. We have, obviously the company is all over the place and there are about 50 people in town this week. And so it was really hard to get up to Phoenix. So I apologize.
Oh, all good. Thank you so much for making time. I always want to start with the founder's background. I'm always curious about upbringing, early experiences in grade school or high school or college that would indicate you were going to take this founder's journey. But tell us a little bit about your background, your upbringing, and any early indications that Cindy was going to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's funny because you and I talked about this off camera before we started, and I was thinking, what was my earliest indication? And it just popped in my head. So I grew up very, very middle class. In fact, I'm the oldest cousin on one side of 30 and the other side of 26. And so there was no expectation that I was going to college. It was blue collar all the way. So very East Coast. Anyway, we live in Baltimore at the time. My dad's a store manager of a Friendly ice cream. So if you grew up on the East Coast, you know what that is.
Oh, yeah.
And my mom runs a daycare out of our home. So this is, but I always I'm like, man, at that age, I was probably 9 or 10 at this age. I just wanted money. I wanted to earn money. I would do chores to earn money. But back then, I was maybe get $5 a week. So what I would do is after every dinner, whatever the leftovers were that we wouldn't eat again, that would go in the trash, I would take them. And we lived in this very, very, very tiny townhouse. Like on the East Coast, everything is up. And in the back, you have these little sheds. And I would set up a haunted house in the shed. And so, it was very dark and I would tell a story and I would hold whoever's hand was going through it. And the story was elaborate. And always it ended up with them. I'd make them take their shoes off, stepping in whatever leftover dinner was last night. And it would be like guts or eyeballs or the spaghetti or, and so I would take their allowance until I probably did this for 2 months until there was a knock on the door one day. And Teresa, who was one of my little friends from the neighborhood, her mom is there and says, "Your daughter is swindling my daughter out of her allowance on a weekly basis."
I love that.
That was my first foyer into entrepreneurship.
I mean, that's like the best kind of early entrepreneur story I've had. It's disgusting. I will say, food on the floor, making your friends step in food. Cindy, come on, that's 100%. Disgusting.
I mean, and it was the same thing every time. And the kids would come back and I'd charge 50 cents, I mean, it was, when I think about it, I was probably the kid in the neighborhood that you did not want your kids hanging out with.
Oh, I love that. Did you experiment with pricing strategy? Was there any early indication
Yes.
Hey, this time of day I could charge a little bit more, any of that?
Well, what I should have done is franchised it to some of the other kids' sheds, and then we would have. But I would have been galvanizing my customer base. So
yeah, everybody's got leftovers. Everybody 100%. Can do this.
And everyone had the little shed. They came with the townhouse.
I loved it. Well, look, one more question about this because I'm an ice cream guy. So, okay. And I spent some time in New York, living on the East Coast here. But so, did you say your dad owned a Friendly's? Is that what you said?
He didn't own it. He was literally a store manager.
Well, did you eat a lot of ice cream? That was really where I was going.
Oh, yes. And it was my first job. And, one of the things Friendly's did when Hershey bought it is, back then when you would scoop the ice cream, it was in these huge, 6-gallon, and they would be down in a freezer. So you would lean over with an ice cream scoop. And they had something called the Friendly's Olympics. And it was who could scoop the sundaes on the menu the fastest, but perfect. The scoop had to be perfect. It had to weigh perfect. I can't show you on camera, but I still have a ridiculously outsized right forearm for how long I scooped ice cream in one of my dad's stores. It is literally a defined forearm. So I would go to the Friendly's Olympics every year and, compete in the I can scoop the best Sunday going. So.
Oh, I love that. Well, at the risk of being awkward and invited never to talk to you again, next time I see you in person, I might ask to see your forearm.
I'm happy to show it to you.
That's so great. I love that story. So what happened after this? You grew up in Baltimore, and walk us through kind of later education experiences, first jobs, and how you kind of started your first company.
Yeah, so we ended up sort of settling in the DC area because my dad ended up becoming a vice president in Friendly's. So as it expanded south, because it started in Boston, which is where he was born and raised, as it expanded south, we moved south. So I went to middle school and high school in I lived in Virginia, but in the DC metro area. Um, I loved high school. Like I was had great friends. I played sports. It was the first time where I really thought, gosh, maybe I'm not just going to graduate high school and get a job. Like I kind of want to go to college. And fortunately for me, I ended up getting a full ride for Division I softball. So I played at George Mason University. They were not, I mean, I would never have made the U of A team. That, in fact, a couple of the years I played in college, like they won the national championship, the U of A, but it did get me to go. And I remember sitting down with my mom and saying, hey, I want to go to school. I still have to pay for my books and things like that. But like, I really do think I want to better myself. And she's like, well, I don't understand. And it wasn't that she wasn't loving or supportive, but in both of my parents' minds, it just wasn't something that you did. And so, but because of the scholarship, I went, and it ended up shaping everything about me. But here's the crazy funny part. I'm coming I'm coming to graduation and I don't have a job. And the minute that I graduate, everything is on me. I've got to find a place to live. I've got to have money. And so I ended up becoming a police officer. And my mom says to me, well, what did we do this college for anyway? Right? Because I ended up in a very blue collar profession. Um, I did that. I was a cop for 5 years, almost to the day. And I was a Montgomery County, Maryland police officer, but literally worked on the DC line. So right there inside the Beltway, pretty worked permanent midnights almost my entire career. So for 5 years in the middle of the night, drove a car by myself as a 21-year-old and carried a gun. And it was the worst job I've ever done. I mean, you see parts of humanity that you candidly would prefer not to know about, right?
Yep.
And then there's sadness and poverty and the whole thing, drugs. And so I but when I reflect on it and I think about who I am now as a leader, those 5 years were the most formative. Like, for example, we have a motto around here: get ahead of trouble before it gets ahead of you. That's what I did on the police department. So I was a female, 21 years old. I never wanted to get into a fight. Like, I never wanted anything to escalate to a fight, because if we're going to get into a fist fight, I'm going to lose, right? With, anybody on the street. And so if people would just even get like a little saucy or start getting like agitated, I would just spray them with pepper spray, because it can't hurt them. There's no one's going to die from that. Like, you get over it in 10 minutes, like the whole 9 yards. And my sergeant would say, why do you use so much pepper spray? And I'm like, hey, I'm getting ahead of trouble before it gets ahead of me. Right. And so that's the motto in entrepreneurship. And then, of course, we have bad days around here. And I'm like, guys, actually, a bad day was the day I got stabbed in my ankle. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a bad day. And so what being a cop taught me was perspective. And I really do think it's shaped my life. And I was really happy to leave the job.
I use this expression all the time, but you're like the female equivalent of the Dos Equis guy. You're the most interesting woman in the world here. Like,
so
like professional, like you're a college softball player on scholarship, then you become a cop. I mean, this is like great stuff. Just out of curiosity, how many women were on the police force? You were on the Baltimore police force at the time. Is that what you said?
Montgomery County, Maryland.
Montgomery County. So were there very many women doing that job at the time?
I mean, generally on a shift, like on my shift, there were two women, me and then another woman. And she'll never listen to this, but Jackie Hoyman, she was like my best friend, because we worked in the middle of the night with a bunch of men. So no, there weren't a lot of women. But what I learned about women on the police department was, like, everyone really desperately tried to assimilate instead of sort of like banding around each other. As you can imagine, it was everything you think it was, right? It was, we were treated differently. Like I can tell you some things that my first sergeant was super old school, was in the Vietnam War. Like I would come out and my car, every single handle would be covered in fingerprint paint. And I'd have to spend like, my weekend literally like cleaning my car. You know what I mean? Just stupid juvenile things that had been passed down as a tradition there. But what was shocking to me was that the women actually didn't bind together. They weren't, um, they weren't, we weren't rallying around each other, because if you did that, then you weren't assimilating. And unequivocally, that is the lesson of being a cop. I knew I was not going to do that for my life. At that point, I knew I was gay, but I had not come out to anybody in my entire life. And so when I made all these decisions, I was like, I'm going to live authentically no matter what happens, because I honestly, I mean, I could have seen myself, if I'd stayed in that profession and lived like that, having a heart attack by the age of 30. It was just too much.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So I learned a lot about sort of playing with the boys, but also realizing that it's okay that they had their way and I had mine, and we could still get along. There was no reason for us all to have to do it one way. I also did start like a little business inside the police department. Of course, I didn't gain anything financially, but I started a program, and this was another time when I was like, oh, I, I didn't realize it then, but I'm going to run my own business someday. We did this program where we went to elementary schools and educated folks on like literally like the benefits of exercise. And, so as a cop, I would get to go in there, and of course I would have worked all night long. And so then I'd go into the elementary school and like do a presentation. But in the end, that kind of innovation inside of a paramilitary organization is not really looked. So then the people on my shift would actually tease me for doing it. And the other thing I learned from being a cop is like, I do not like being in a paramilitary organization and having someone tell me what to do just because they have more tenure.
Yeah. Well, such great lessons that you mentioned there. Observations about missed opportunities to strengthen together, and like an inclination to assimilate instead of like band together. And there's obviously real strength in banding together. Other observations about like, you clearly are a person who wants to have impact. That was really obvious early, right? You want to have impact on your community in different ways, and have and do something innovative. So any other kind of summary lessons here? I think summary lessons are so powerful, but that's such a great story, and what a fascinating way to start your career.
Yeah, I mean, I would not trade it for the world. And I also was, unhappy. I mean, back then they would let you take your cruiser home. It was supposed to be a benefit so that you didn't have to pay for gas, like going back and forth.
Right.
And I think, and I don't think I'm exaggerating here, I think 30 times when I was off duty, my cruiser was reported stolen, and a 16-year-old boy is driving it. So I would show up at work and we'd be in roll call, and they'd play the 911 call. There is a police cruiser. And then the dispatcher would say, what's the stock number, the number on the side of the car? And they'd be 1154, and it's being driven by a 16-year-old boy. And, and so then the dispatcher would go like, oh no, that's Officer Jordan. She looks really young. And they'd say, that's not a girl.
Oh,
That's my summary lesson.
oh, that's funny. Well, one last question: how many employees at Pyx Health have been pepper sprayed?
Zero.
Okay, zero. Okay, I just wanted to clarify and make sure you're not currently in your pepper spray years if you can avoid it.
No, I mean, that was necessity, right? Like, but I really understand. Actually, this is the one thing I think. I'm not the smartest person that's done this. I didn't go to Harvard. I don't have an MBA. I never did any of that, but I have a super high emotional EQ, and I learned that on the streets.
Yep.
Period.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And love the story of like the lesson you learned then that's that even is now one of the values or like the mottos you have at Pyx Health, get in front of trouble before it gets in front of you. I love
That's
that.
it. That's
So
it.
how about, so post police force, what happened next? And let's move into kind of the entrepreneurial journey here.
Yeah, so super fast forward, I got into political fundraising and loved it. I lived in DC, you know what I mean? It turned out I had a knack for raising money, which of course is going to help me as an entrepreneur. Really just had the time of my life. Like those 5, 6 years were amazing. And then I got involved in a presidential campaign, and just for fear of, I don't want to ostracize anyone, so I won't say what team I was on, but my team ended up losing. And when you sort of get into political fundraising in a presidential campaign, you're betting on winning and having a job, because if you don't have a job. And I was unemployed at the age of 30. And I was like, you know what? I kind of want to do something really totally different. So I loaded up a U-Haul. I had been to Tucson 3 times for political fundraisers and loved it. Just having grown up on the East Coast, I loved the desert. I felt like it was so spiritual. I loved that you could drive places and not sit on the Beltway for 17 hours. And so I loaded up all my stuff in a U-Haul. And back then it was book on tape. And I got the Thornbirds, which was 15 tapes long. And I drove across country without a job and landed in Tucson and ended up picking up a job at the Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation as a fundraiser. And after that, made my way to an ad agency, because I'm very good at like taking numbers and messages and turning them into campaigns. And worked my way up to the lead strategist at a marketing firm here in Tucson that was actually pretty big, run by these 2 women who were just the most amazing people. And then 2008 hit, and I'll never forget it. It was, they laid off the entire staff except for 3 of us on St. Patrick's Day. So we are lit. Like everyone is drinking, everyone is crying. Like it's the, and we didn't even know it, but the marketing industry would never recover after that, you know? So the next day, completely hungover, I call the 2 owners of the company and I say, "Hey, can I take you guys to coffee?" They're hungover, like we just show up. I said, "Look, I've been representing a huge hospital system for 4 years at that point as the lead strategist. And I said, I have an idea for a business. And the best time to start a business is at the end, is in a recession. And we are full on going into it. So I said, what you guys are going to do, because at this point, I probably had $2,000 in savings. I made, I think, $60,000 a year. Like, I mean, I was not rolling, you know? I said, you guys are going to put $40,000 in each, and we're going to be the starting founding group. And then the rest is history. Like, we spun up a company, which was a medical referral company. In other words, basically what was happening in the market was all these clinicians were coming together into ACOs, accountable care organizations, and clinically integrated networks, yet they were unaffiliated with each other. But the only way they were going to make money from the government, from CMS, was to, they had to keep patients inside that clinically integrated network. Because, like, for example, if I was a primary care doctor and you're a cardiologist and we're in the clinically integrated network together and we have a chance of getting like money for good health outcomes. I mean, it is a very good model. But if I don't send my patient to you and I send it to the cardiologist down the street, then we've just lost the opportunity to get credit for that improved quality outcome. So I started figuring out that it wasn't doctors making referrals anymore because of insurance and who takes what, and people retiring. It was the medical assistant in the front office that made about $13 an hour. So I created this super simple Google-like search that sat on top of their medical record. And when the physician would say, send them to a cardiologist, they would have choice to send them anywhere, but the ones that would come up at the top were highest quality and inside of the clinically integrated network. And we made it all compliant because it wasn't like we forced anybody to refer anywhere. They could refer to the entire list, but we made it easier for them to keep patients inside. And so that was my first business. And I know we're going to talk about this. And I made
So what was the name of this? What was the name of this company?
Medical Referral Source. And I sold it in 3 years to the advisory board.
Interesting. Yeah, the advisory board has done a lot in education as well. That I've kind of, they have the education advisory board
Yes.
that I've kind of known over the years. So That's interesting. You know, just one observation listening to you talk, and I've talked to you a couple times before, before this podcast, but I don't feel like I know you super well. But you tell me if my read on you is right here. You're someone who seems to do things that are like slightly nonconformist and seemingly counterintuitive, right? You're the first one in your family that goes to college. It sounds like that was uncharted water. You pick a profession that not a lot of women like you chose to do in that, especially in that period of time. And then you kind of like in the middle of a recession, the great financial crisis, you're like, hey, time to start a company. Like,
Yes,
am I getting the right read on you here?
100%.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, and I think it's served me well until now that and I know we're going to get there. I'm running a very big company and I have private equity partners, and like that be like that way where fast and your gut and you just go and don't let perfect be the enemy of good, now everything's shifting, and so it's really becoming a transition for me. I love that part. Love it. But
You're talking about you love the early and growth part. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
love it.
Figuring it all out. Yeah.
Yeah. I love raising money,
Yeah.
because I really, in both instances, and this one is obviously very personal. And I know we're going to talk about that, but like, I believe, and this is what I learned in political fundraising. If you can sit in front of someone and say, I believe in that man or woman that's standing up there and their messages, and I'm asking you to believe too, if you can sell that, you know, and it has to come from a true, authentic place, you can sell anything.
I love that. I think a lot of founders don't realize the thing that sells more than anything else when you're fundraising is, hey, this is my life's work. This is my purpose. This is what I care about. And I'm inviting you to join in to like this cause. If you care about this like I do, please join me in this. Like, and so that's fun for those of us that have a purpose, a real purpose orientation around wanting to change the world. So that really resonates with me, but I love that. It's fundraising can be daunting for people, but I think if they look at it through the lens of, hey, this is like what I'm all about, and I'm inviting you to be what I'm all about, I think that makes fundraising quite a bit easier.
Yeah. I mean, plus, and I know there has to be structure, particularly if you want to get into angel groups and presentations. But what I did early days of that, because I was talking about what they, and it's a gross word to refer to patients, but it's called patient steerage. It is a part of our business. It just is, whether we like it or not. And so I was sitting in front of angels who don't, number one, want to know that their doctor's not actually making the referral, but the person sitting at the front desk is. And number two, nobody wants to see the underbelly of what healthcare looks like. So I wouldn't even use a PowerPoint. I would bring a big whiteboard and I would draw a mothership and I would explain how patients need to go up the right beam to the mothership or else money falls out. And I would just draw it like a fifth grader. And it would take me 5 minutes and I raked in the investment.
Wow. Love it. Well, let's jump to, I know also got a kind of personal connection to Pyx Health, but was that the next company or was there one in between?
So I did do one in between, but it wasn't mine. And that was probably the best life lesson I've ever learned. It was a growing concern company, and it had a piece of technology that I thought was super interesting. And we had spent some money on the side while I worked for the advisory board for 2 years. That was my earnout period. And I actually loved it. They were a great company. They taught me a ton of stuff about sales. Like I changed who I am. But while I was doing that, our second daughter was starting college, and I was very worried about like the drugging, like the date rape scene, that whole thing. And so we paid some guys to build this little, in effect, what I called a 1050 button, because when I was a cop, there's a little button on your radio, and when you hit it, it would put out a 1050, which means you're in grave danger. And it would live inside of a bra strap. So you could push that, and then using the Bluetooth wireless network, it would first send alarms to your friends. And if somebody didn't actually respond, it would then, make an emergency phone call. And so we never operationalized. I never wanted to. I just kind of wanted to build the tech. So I found a company where the tech fit in out of Phoenix, and I don't want to say who or what because I don't want to, but um, raised money, gave, did an entirely stock deal, and went to try to help the CEO and this person. And in 6 months, the company went under. And the only reason it lasted 6 months was because of the money I raised. And so what I learned in that is like, I have to be the boss. And I know what that sounds like, but it's the truth. If I'm going to take anybody's money, I'm going to be the steward of it. So to that end, when I started Pyx Health, and I know we're going to talk about why, all those people that I took money from and lost in 6 months, I gave them the equivalent of my founder's shares.
Hmm. I love that.
You know
Well,
what?
let's jump.
It has been used against me. Like there have been venture guys and private equity guys that are like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, let me tell you what's wrong with me. Like, I'd like to bring some humanity to our profession. I realize, I mean, because we just did a deal, and I see what those folks are making then, and what they're going to make at the at the next exit. Like, I gave them back a very healthy return, and they deserved it because they trusted me.
One thing that really resonates with me on that, and I think maybe a lot of people don't appreciate, is when someone gives you money, or when you put yourself out there and say, "Hey, I hope you believe in what I believe in and invest in this thing," and it doesn't work out. There's a feeling of, um, I don't know if obligation, but I certainly feel like, hey, I'm a steward of someone else's money. So it's hard to not want to. And when I feel like also when someone invests in your thing or gives you money to support like you in building your company, it's very personal. Like it's not, to me, it's very personal when someone gives me their money. It's like the ultimate manifestation of, yeah, I believe in you and I believe in
Yeah.
what's happening. And so that, to me, that really resonates. I completely understand the desire to try to make people whole or like do what it takes here and in a way because of that sense of stewardship.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can look at it and say, "Oh, that's a soft entrepreneur. Maybe I'm soft because I'm a woman." But what I look at that is like, and I know this is woo-woo stuff, but that's karma, you know? And and again, next life lesson in the entrepreneur journey. If I'm going to raise a dollar from you, I'm going to be the steward of that dollar. I'm not going to turn it over to somebody else. I
Yeah,
can't.
that's such a great lesson. Well, let's jump into Pix Health. I mean, this is the like
Yeah.
what we're all well, this is what we're all here for, Sandy. Let's hear about it. Like why'd you start it and tell us all about the evolution here.
Well, I after I stopped working at the advisory board, I literally was taking like 6 months off or so. I was doing a little bit of consulting, but I just kind of wanted a break. And I went to the movies 3 times a week. It was my best life. Movies were like our thing as a family. I mean, I would we have a roadhouse here where they serve you lunch. I was literally having the best life. And this was 2017. And then my stepdaughter, who at the time was an adult, had a very bad year that year. She ended up being diagnosed with bipolar, and she had been in and out of the emergency room, and we didn't know because she was an adult, so we didn't get informed. And she ended up in an inpatient facility suffering from addiction issues. And I'm a fixer. This is what I've done my whole life, even as a cop. And so I sat her down and I said, "What comes first? Please give me the early detection warning signs so that we can get ahead of this, because that year was horrible." And she said, "I no one understands me and I'm all alone." And I said, "Well, what do you mean you're all alone? Like, you come to family dinner, we're here, we help you, we have resources. Like, I don't understand this pervasive feeling of loneliness." And I became obsessed with it and started researching loneliness, like up, down, and everywhere. And what I found out is that it is actually a mental health condition that affects the brain, just like depression, just like anxiety. But yet we were the only developed country, the United States, at the time before the pandemic, that didn't treat it like a diagnosable, treatable condition. And so I saw an opportunity and just said, we have to do this again. We have to start another company, and we have to help people not go through what Riley went through. So Riley actually worked for us here. She was one of our first Andes, and these are the folks that do peer mentoring on the phone, and we call them Andy. It stands for Authentic, Nurturing, Dependable, Your Friend. And so we got her certified in peer support. Her life is good. She's sober. She's taking her meds. She's managing the bipolar, and then the pandemic hits. So two things happened to me then. my business blew up in a way I could never even have imagined. And my stepdaughter died because her soft world, her world that was so carefully constructed, blew up. And so Pyx is her legacy. Like, there is nothing I can tell you other than when you there's people process grief very differently. I process that grief by what we do today. 11,000 phone calls a day, 8 million lives covered. We're in 93 markets, and I promise you that somewhere out there I stopped a family from going through what mine went through, because we obviously got her phone after she passed away, and like one of the last texts in the last chain, she talked about how lonely she was. And here I am running a loneliness company. So it's this one's really different.
Cindy, first of all, thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that, like something so
Right.
personal that's amazing and appreciated. And I know there's people listening that feel seen and heard in a way you and I probably can't even imagine because of what you just shared. So thank you for doing that. There's purpose, and then there's like purpose. This is
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
that's about your personal experience is about that's about as powerful as I've ever heard in my whole life, and I've heard a lot of founder stories. Um, what after your stepdaughter's death, were there things that changed in the way you thought? Was there any, and I don't know the answer to this, was there any products or services or orientation, or was it just, hey, I got to double down on what we're doing more because I'm all in? But like, how did that personal tragedy affect like your work life over the last few years?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a couple things that it did for me. Is that one, it what we learned because we watched Riley's journey. And if you just think about what I always say, if you want to start a healthcare business, this is very unfortunate. You have to follow the money. And if you think about Riley, what would happen is she'd have these periods of time where she cost her health insurance payer, who at the time was United, zero, and then everything would go crazy and she would cost them 1.7 million in 12 months, right? So when I started thinking about it from a business perspective, I'm like, oh, there's a buyer here. The health plans, if I can convince them, if I can show them, not just through Riley's journey, but all these other people that we were serving, that loneliness is actually a predicator for all of this, like some of this crazy spend. And it's ignored in healthcare. And it's a way to build trust. When you help somebody solve something so pervasive as loneliness, which is why we're not just a tech platform, why I have 200 plus peer mentors that I employ, right? When you solve something so pervasive and intimate as loneliness, they trust you. And when you have trust from members and patients in healthcare, you have the Quan. And so, what it taught me, Riley's experience, is I couldn't just help them with loneliness. We have to help them if they're suffering from addiction to get into a program. If they don't have food in their fridge, we got to put it there. We got to get them a ride to their doctor's appointment. If they haven't seen a doctor in months and months, because what loneliness does is make you mistrust. You believe no one understands and no one can help you. You stop taking your medicine. So we do that for them. So once we find those lonely folks and we help them through, we got to go a mile deep, and there's nothing we won't do.
Oh, Cindy, I love that. There's an interesting relationship here that we've kind of talked a little bit about that's been on my mind for other reasons, but mental health, addiction, and loneliness, and how these things like really come together in damaging ways here. Any insight? I mean, you're close to this, and I'm not, but any insight on that?
Here's the thing. I tell this story on purpose, even on sales calls, because and I've never ever not one time been on a call where somebody doesn't come off mute and I'm not even looking at their face. One of the things we do is like, you have to be on camera all the time. We're a loneliness company. I don't want to see your initials in a circle. But we pitch to health plans. A lot of them even have policies that they can't be on camera. So I'm talking to initials and I tell this story about losing my daughter. And someone will come off camera and say, my son, my daughter, my niece, my nephew, my mom, my dad. What we all know about mental health and the pervasiveness of it, and particularly loneliness, is it's 1 degree removed. So there is not a single call. And, it doesn't mean the person's going to buy my product. That's okay. But you know what it does mean is in that moment, we connected as not a vendor and a health plan, but as humans. And I always take that as a win.
You know what's so interesting about Pix, and it's like what makes this an amazing business or there's many things obviously, but you you have this problem that is universally uh, understood in some ways, right? Because we all experience it personally. We like you described, like everybody's got some personal connection to addiction, loneliness, suicide, like death, all these things that were connected to this. Yet nobody was actually working on this problem in the way that Pix was. Like that's what's fascinating about someone who starts a company. Like it seems hyper obvious in hindsight
Yeah.
because this is universally appreciated. But is that been your experience? Like, hey, but nobody's really working on this in this way, and yet at the same time, its effects are universal here.
Yeah. I mean, look, here's how I equate it. If there are people who suffer from depression, and then there are people who feel sad, right? And so there are things for folks to do who feel sad, but then for people who are truly suffering from depression, there is a whole nother level of intervention that needs to happen. That's what I'm doing. Like we can talk about loneliness, and I feel lonely. Like particularly, the whole DNA of my family changed when Riley passed away. I became a caregiver, which I had, not ever done before. We lost our dog like a year later, and you would have thought we lost another child. Like the whole family, we didn't get out of our jammies for days. Like, but I guess what I'm getting at is like there's being feeling a little alone, and then there's having chronic loneliness. And that is what I'm trying to draw attention to. That is a true, honest to God, deadly condition. It increases your mortality rate by 26%. Like, that's what I'm trying to do. So, if you just think about it in the widely understood depression, I get that there are sad people out there, right? And I get that there are people that feel alone occasionally. I'm trying to find the chronically lonely who are literally physically suffering because they're in what I call the stuck in mud.
Yeah. Thank you for that distinction. One last question I wanted to ask you about this, and then maybe shift gears just a little bit. But
Sure.
I have the perception, and no data. Hopefully, you have some data here. But I have the perception that chronic loneliness here, not just being a little sad as you make the distinction here, chronic loneliness is only expanding and becoming more pervasive. Like we're more connected than ever on devices, on social, et cetera. Yet
Yep.
chronic loneliness is becoming an even more pervasive problem. Is that true? And if so, like why is that happening?
So the AARP did a study, I think it's now 2 or 3 years ago now, where they do it every few years on loneliness. And the last study was the first study where the age group from 18 to 26 from past seniors as the most lonely population in the world. And that is literally because of social media. So think about it this way. We started the podcast by I told you where I would run my friends through my shed and take their allowance. But I had growing up, and particularly in high school, I had a core group of friends that we were so close. We learned how to fight. We learned how to forgive. We learned how to talk to each other. We learned how to move through problems together. You can't do that on social media. You can have 100 friends, but it's an inch deep instead and a mile wide. I had a mile deep and an inch wide. I had a core group of friends, and I just like you, and I learned things about how to be human. And our generation, my youngest son is 15. That generation doesn't understand that.
Yeah.
I do not. I run a tech company, and I literally my kid is a freshman in high school. He has one social media platform, and I check it regularly. And he doesn't understand, but I'm like, I'm so sorry. It's almost like giving you a loaded gun. I just can't do it.
Oh, I agree. I won't share my own personal experience, but totally agree on that. You mentioned anything else on specifically the problem you're solving in chronic loneliness. I would love to talk about your investor journey next, but I don't want to cut this off
No,
here.
this is
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, look, you can go to our website. There's a lot on there. I'll just say that Pyx Health has a heartbeat, and I'd love to tell you that it's got the best, smartest entrepreneur at the helm, but really it is a living, breathing thing all on its own, and just has this space in the world that has nothing to do with me. It's become, a I had a financial partner that said, Cindy, you're punching a hole in the earth. And that is the way I look at it.
You know, there are a lot of people who have never worked for a purpose-driven organization, and then they join a purpose-driven organization,
Right.
and it's like a light goes on. And I always tell people, I don't know why on earth you would ever spend time not doing, like working on something where you don't feel some personal connection to it. I mean, even I'm not saying you have to start a company, but
Yeah.
find someone like doing something in the area where you feel like deep purpose on. So I hear that in everything you say about Pyx Health here is the power of purpose is just, there's nothing like it for sure.
Oh, it's so funny. I have to tell you a very funny story. Exactly what you're saying. When we hire folks, like we have a lot of folks under the age of 30 here. I always tell them, because I try to meet with everyone we hire, I always say, get ready because I just ruined the rest of your life. Like you're never going to
100%.
find it like this again.
You know, one of the things I'm really proud of about Campus Logic is uh, even now I have people message me like this last month, text me and say, Campus Logic's the greatest place I ever worked. I really miss it.
Isn't
And
it,
uh,
isn't
and
that the
that
best
is
feeling?
it's so good. It feels so
Yeah.
good, especially if you build a company that has like purpose-driven culture and broad-based employee ownership where everyone participates in
Yep.
in that. I just like, to me, that's the magic of like company building. I want to talk about the investor journey a little bit because
Okay.
a lot of people listening are trying to figure out how do I raise capital or how should I think about like finding the right investors and how do I go on the capital raising journey and think about that. Any words of wisdom on just raising capital and building a venture or private equity backed company and what that means?
Yeah, I mean, look, for Pix, it was easy because I had a very successful exit in 3 years, and investors made literally like 7 or 8 times their money in a short period of time. But so I'll talk about the first company because this is where the advice is germane. I told you I had never made more than $60,000 a year. I certainly didn't have money, but I did find somebody who believed in what I was doing, and he was connected to money. So he started setting up pitches, but and then the rest is history. But how did I find him? Here's the key. Everywhere I went, every baby shower, every Christmas party, every happy hour, I talked about MRS, medical referral source. It got to the point where my family is like, you can come to the party tomorrow, but you cannot talk about your business. And I'm like, you never know who's going to be there. And by God, at a barbecue, for no reason whatsoever, probably the 1 millionth time I've told the story, I meet a guy who not only is passionate about healthcare and changing it, but believed. And then he opened up his entire network to me. And so my advice is, yes, get on the angel scene. Yes, talk to venture, but really it became my obsession. Talk to anyone who will listen. You never know.
I totally agree with that. I used to tell people you should have like the kind of breakfast meeting and then the post breakfast meeting and then meet someone for coffee and then like the pre lunch meeting. Like take every meeting you can, talk to
That's right.
everybody you can, pitch everybody you can, and get better at it. Like it's a skill and a craft, but it all starts with exactly kind of where you were going was, hey, if you're passionate and you feel purpose here, that story comes through. I want to ask you about something that we did talk about off camera a little bit. It's also been on my mind as well. But I do think men and women seem to talk about money differently, talk about fundraising differently, and maybe the way that men and women sometimes talk about money differently affects fundraising. And I know you've got particular insight and experience here as well. Can you give any thoughts or wisdom to both the men and women listening to this?
Yeah, I mean, just from my perspective as a woman, it's almost like considered like unsightly, if you will, to talk about money. Like not just raising money for my company, but I, Cindy Jordan, want to make money. But when a man does it, he's driven, and he's ambitious, but when a woman does it, it's like ugh, a bit on the distasteful side. And so that's one of the things, like I sort of, when I do talks like this, and I do a lot of them at the university and stuff, I encourage women to manifest money. And I didn't make this up. Like I got to give it to Brene Brown and many other people who have like really helped me get there. Um, you know, I'm over 50 now. I know I don't look it. It's okay. And and I'm a woman. So if you look at private equity money, I am funded 0.0002% of the time. Yet women over the age of 50 succeed at successful exits almost 3 times as much as their male counterparts. So why is this? And it's because of the fact that, you know, we don't want women like being direct about the money. And in my first company, that's what I did wrong. I literally let an investor tell me that, you know, that I gave away too much of my company. That's just the long and short of it. I gave away too much of my company in the first company. I believed what people. I tried to like stay in line and like be in my place. I literally wasn't even the CEO of my own company until I like had somebody sort of just slap me across the face and like, what are you doing? You know, and and it really is. There is gender stereotyping going on.
Yeah, I agree. Just to pile on a little bit here, you mentioned you used a reference on the, I think you said PE-backed founders, or I think you said 3x more likely, but just to pile on to that a little bit more, and the audience can go fact check me and go do their own work. But this manifests in a couple of other ways too. If you look at Fortune 500 companies run by women, there's the
Yeah.
same pattern of like exit returns going on here, or like I should say, like shareholder value creation going on. Also in like wealth managers, led by like female-led wealth managers, also seem to deliver better returns consistently on average than their male counterparts. So there is something about either I don't know where that like the exact source of that, but there is a pattern here. Like there is in fact a pattern here of like amazing stewardship, amazing execution by by women on across multiple things, PE-backed founders, publicly traded companies, and wealth managers. That seems to be, like it is a pattern, I guess, is the short of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does go back to like kind of the EQ that you and I talked about, right? Like, you know, you've mentioned culture a few times, and our culture is really different. So we call them BBOs, so beliefs, behaviors, and outcomes. What do we believe? And that we have 3 of them. What are the behaviors associated with our beliefs? And then what are the outcomes we want from that? That's our culture. So I'll give you an example of one. One of our beliefs is to bring your love and joy to work. And I remember an employee once said to me, well, why are you using the word love? And I'm like, well, why not? Like who said we can't say love in business? Like who says if we're not all going to like each other, but if we come to work that way, like leading with love and joy, I can promise you even if there's someone you don't like, you're not going to be mean. You know what I mean? It just sets you up. And what are the behaviors associated with that? How do you show your love and joy at work? And then what are the outcomes that we're trying to get to? And so, this is how we operate. Uh I, in fact, now that we have almost, or oh God, I don't even know, like around 300 employees, I find it very hard because I want to be more authentic than I can nowadays. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
um, it's it is turning into a whole nother game. I said this on the panel, so I know you've heard it. Like, I feel like I live in a spreadsheet now instead of but back to the idea, why are women more successful? I do think it comes down to like this the the emotional EQ that is often now to stand up for some dudes out there, you're raised not to have it, right? Like don't show weakness. What are you crying about over there? Like buck it up. Like you get knocked down in a game, sit, brush it off. Like so there's this whole different thing. I read this
Yes.
article once, and this sums up business for men and women. Men have to play well in the game to feel good. Women have to feel good to play well in the game.
Mm.
There's the distinction.
Oh, I love that. Hey, well that's probably a good place wrap here, but such good wisdom. I want to go to a couple closing questions. And by the way, just so you know, I'm completely unemployable. But if I were employable, I would be looking for a job at Pyx Health. Like, well, that sounds like an amazing culture. That's a place I want to work.
Well, I really appreciate that. Actually, it's a super big vote of confidence.
Yeah, I love it. Let me ask a couple closing questions here, and I might not have given you a heads up on this, but one, I'm always interested in what someone's most grateful for. My gratitude's an important thing to me. I'm happiest when I'm the most grateful, not the other way around. And so I try to orient around gratitude. But what's something you're thankful for? It can be personal, work, or anything you want.
I mean, I am so grateful for, for the love of my family. Like, it's when something is taken from you against the natural order, you literally learn to just appreciate the Sunday barbecue. Like, there is not a day that goes by where I'm with my family or friends and I'm not, I mean, I can't even help myself. Like, at dinner, I'm always like, guys, let's go around the table and say what we're grateful for. And they're like, oh, like no one wants to do it, but it just, I really, the one thing I want to thank Riley for, even though I would give anything to have her back, is like all the small moments I'm so grateful for. And I'm glad I notice them now.
Yeah. Shout out to Riley. Thank you for that. Okay. The least important question, but I'm secretly curating a list here. So I have been known to eat like an odd amount of Mexican food, including like tacos. I would eat tacos every single day. So where's your favorite place to get tacos? In Tucson, in Phoenix, anywhere in Arizona? Like, favorite Mexican food, but ideally tacos.
So I would say my favorite tacos have to be at Sace. Have you eaten there in Tucson?
I don't think so, but this sounds like a special trip coming up for me.
You got to do it. I mean, it's like, first of all, they have like jackfruit tacos. So good. I mean, it is like a sort of healthier twist on the taco. I don't eat a lot of meat, so you're kind of asking the wrong person. I will do it when I've bought it myself from a rancher, but I won't order it anywhere. So I seek out the best vegetarian tacos.
But Say's Tacos is the place for that, you're
Sace
saying?
is the place.
Okay, I love it. Hey, Cindy, thank you so much for, first of all, thank you for being on the podcast, but maybe more importantly, thanks for all you're doing to solve chronic loneliness in the world. Like, you know this, but the world needs you. The world needs Pyx Help, and appreciate you and your founder journey and the enormous impact you're having on the world. So thank you for all of that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Look, I mean, you and I kind of go way back, but I always love, I really, thanks for doing this podcast. I find motivation from people like you who have been successful. Like, literally, there are days when you get up and you're like, oh my God, why am I torturing myself like that? But thinking about things like that you've done and others like you, it's very motivating.
So it sounds like if I call you up and say, hey, I'm in Tucson, let's go to Say's Tacos, you'll say yes.
100%.
Okay, it's on.
All right.
Hey, Cindy, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Take care. Thank you.